Picture this: an innocent 8-year-old farm girl, her face bruised and spirit shaken, stands alone against a pack of cruel bullies who think they've won, but they're about to learn a shattering truth. Her mother is no ordinary woman, and vengeance is coming. Dive into this gripping, heart-pounding tale of justice, courage, and shocking twists that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Subscribe now to unlock this unforgettable 12,000-word story split into 4 explosive chapters and join thousands of readers in the USA and UK who can't stop talking about this epic saga of retribution and redemption. The sun hung low over the sprawling Nebraska cornfields, painting the horizon in hues of amber and gold. 8-year-old Clara Hensley trudged along the dirt path from school, her worn sneakers kicking up clouds of dust. Her pigtails bounced with each step, and her faded blue dress fluttered in the late summer breeze. Clara was small for her age, with freckles dusting her cheeks like stars, and eyes that held a quiet resilience. She carried a canvas satchel patched and fraying, filled with her school books and a half-eaten apple. The path wound through the fields, a shortcut from the one-room schoolhouse to the Hensley farm, where she lived with her mother, Elisa, in a modest clapboard house. Clara hummed softly, a tune her mother had taught her, about sparrows finding their way home. It was a song of comfort, one she clung to on days like today, when the world felt heavier than her small shoulders could bear. Clara's life wasn't easy. The Hensley farm was small, barely scraping by, and the townsfolk of Willow Creek often whispered about Elisa Hensley, a woman who kept to herself, rarely venturing into town except for supplies. Some called her eccentric, others unkindly labeled her a recluse. Clara, though, adored her mother. Elisa was her rock, her storyteller, her protector. But today, Clara felt unprotected. The memory of what had happened at school burned in her chest. It wasn't the first time she'd been targeted, but it was the worst. The trouble had started at recess. Clara, as usual, sat alone under the big oak tree, sketching in her notebook, a gift from her mother. Her drawings were her escape, filled with fantastical creatures and far-off places. But a group of older boys, led by 12-year-old Tommy Granger, had other plans. Tommy was the son of the town's wealthiest farmer, a boy with a mean streak as wide as the Platte River. His gang, Billy, Nate, and Caleb, followed his lead. Their laughter sharp and cruel. They'd been picking on Clara for weeks, calling her Raggedy Clara. Because of her hand-me-down clothes, mocking her for living on what they called that dirt-poor farm. Today though, they'd gone further. It started with taunts. "Hey, Raggedy Clara, where's your pa?" "Oh, right. He ran off 'cause your M's a weirdo," Tommy had sneered, his friends cackling. Clara tried to ignore them, focusing on her sketch of a dragon soaring over mountains. But then Tommy snatched her notebook, tearing pages out and tossing them into the dirt. Clara's heart lurched. She lunged for the book, but Billy shoved her back, and she stumbled, scraping her knees. The boys laughed harder, circling her like vultures. Then Tommy grabbed a rock, small, but heavy enough, and threw it. It struck Clara's temple, and pain exploded in her head. She fell, blood trickling down her cheek, her vision swimming. The boys froze for a moment as if surprised by their own cruelty, then scattered when the school teacher's whistle pierced the air. Clara hadn't cried. Not then. She'd picked herself up, gathered her torn pages, and sat through the rest of class with a handkerchief pressed to her head. The teacher, Miss Larson, noticed the blood, but accepted Clara's quiet lie that she'd fallen. Clara didn't want trouble. She didn't want her mother to worry. But now walking home, the tears came. They stung the cut on her temple, mixing with the blood that had dried in a thin line. She felt small, smaller than ever, and the weight of the boys' laughter pressed down on her. As she neared the edge of the cornfield, Clara heard footsteps behind her. Her heart sank. She turned to see Tommy and his gang, the grins wicked in the fading light. "Thought you could run home and cry to your crazy my," Tommy taunted, picking up another rock. Clara's stomach twisted. She clutched her satchel and ran, her legs pumping as fast as they could. The boys chased, their shouts echoing through the stalks. Clara darted into the cornfield, hoping to lose them, but the rustling stalks betrayed her path. She tripped, sprawling into the dirt, and before she could scramble up, Tommy loomed over her. "You're going to learn to stay quiet, Raggedy Clara," he said, raising the rock. But then a sound, a low guttural growl stopped him cold. It came from the shadows of the cornfield, deep and unnatural. The boys froze, their eyes wide. Clara, trembling, looked toward the sound. Something moved in the stalks. Something large. Tommy dropped the rock and stumbled back. What the hell was that? He whispered. The girl came again, closer now, and the boys bolted, crashing through the corn in a panic. Clara stayed on the ground, her heart pounding, unsure if she should be more afraid of the boys or whatever lurked in the field. Then, silence, she stood shaky, and ran the rest of the way home. The Hensley farmhouse was a weathered relic, its paint peeling, but its porch sturdy. Clara burst through the door, her breath ragged. Elisa was in the kitchen stirring a pot of stew, her dark hair pulled back in a braid. She was tall with sharp green eyes that seemed to see through everything. "Clara, what's wrong?" she asked, dropping the spoon as she saw her daughter's bloodied face. Clara tried to speak, but the sobs came instead. Elisa knelt, pulling her close, her hands gentle but firm as she examined the wound. "Who did this?" she asked, her voice low. "Dangerous." Clara hesitated, then whispered, "Tommy Granger and his friends." Eliza's face hardened, but she said nothing more. Just cleaned Clara's cut and tucked her into bed with a promise that everything would be all right. But as Clara drifted to sleep, she heard her mother pacing the kitchen, muttering words she couldn't make out. Words that sounded old, almost like a chant. And outside in the dark, the cornfield seemed to whisper back. The next morning, Clara woke to the smell of pancakes and the sound of her mother humming. The cut on her temple was bandaged, and though it throbbed, she felt safer in the light of day. Elisa was at the stove, her movements calm but precise, like a woman who knew exactly what she was doing. "You're staying home today," she said, setting a plate in front of Clara. "No arguments." Clara nodded, grateful. She didn't want to face Tommy or the others. Not yet, but the town of Willow Creek was already buzzing. Word of the incident had spread, as things do in small towns. By noon, a few neighbors stopped by ostensibly to check on Clara, but clearly fishing for gossip. Mrs. Carter, a nosy widow, clucked her tongue as she eyed Clara's bandage. "Those Granger boys are trouble," she said. "Their paws got money though, so they get away with everything." Elisa smiled thinly, offering tea, but saying little. When the neighbors left, she sat with Clara, her expression unreadable. "Tell me everything," she said. Clara recounted the bullying, the rock, the chase, and the strange growl in the cornfield. Elisa listened, her eyes narrowing at the mention of the sound. "You're sure it was a girl?" she asked. Clara nodded, describing how it had scared the boys off. Elisa's lips pressed into a line, but she didn't explain. Instead, she said, "Stay close to the house today. I need to go into town." Elisa's trips to town were rare, and Clara sensed something different in her mother's demeanor. Something steely. She watched from the porch as Eliza climbed into their old pickup truck and drove off the engine coughing. Clara spent the day drawing, trying to capture the dragon from her torn notebook. But her mind kept drifting to the growl, Tommy's cruel face, to her mother's quiet intensity. In town, Elisa parked outside the general store and walked to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Danvers, a burly man with a penchant for avoiding trouble, looked up in surprise. "Elisa Hensley," he said, leaning back in his chair. "What brings you here?" Elisa's voice was calm but cold. "My daughter was attacked yesterday. Tommy Granger and his friends threw a rock at her head." Danvers frowned, scratching his beard. "Kids being kids, Elisa, I'll talk to them," but Elisa cut him off. "This wasn't kids being kids. Clara's hurt. I want it handled." Danvers promised to look into it, but his tone was dismissive and Elisa left with a fire in her chest. She didn't go straight home. Instead, she drove to the Granger farm, a sprawling estate with a gleaming white house and a fleet of new tractors. She knocked on the door and Mrs. Granger, a prim woman in a floral dress, answered. "Elisa, what's this about?" Elisa explained the incident, her voice steady but laced with warning. Mrs. Granger's face palled, but her husband Tom Cern appeared, his expression hard. "My boy wouldn't do that," he snapped. "And if he did, well, kids fight. Your girl needs to toughen up." Eliza's eyes flashed, but she said nothing more, turning and leaving without another word. Back at home, Clara noticed her mother's tension, but didn't ask questions. That night, Elisa sat by the fireplace, staring into the flames. Clara crept downstairs, unable to sleep, and saw her mother holding an old leather book, its pages yellowed and covered in strange symbols. Elisa didn't notice her, too focused on the book, her lips moving silently. Clara felt a chill, not from the night air, but from something deeper, something she couldn't name. The next day, the bullying escalated. Tommy and his gang, emboldened by their parents' indifference and the sheriff's inaction, cornered Clara's best friend, Sophie, at school. Sophie was a shy girl who'd stood up for Clara before. They pushed her into the dirt, warning her to stay away from Raggedy Clara, or face worse. Sophie ran to the Hensley farm after school, tears streaming, and told Clara everything. Clara's heart broke, but she also felt a spark of anger. She told her mother, expecting comfort. Instead, Eliza's face darkened. Enough, she said almost to herself. This ends now. That night, Claire awoke to a strange sound, a rhythmic tapping like rain but sharper. She peered out her window and saw her mother in the backyard standing in a circle of stones she'd never noticed before. Elisa was chanting, her voice low and melodic, the old book open in her hands. The air felt thick, charged, and Clara swore she saw shadows moving in the cornfield. Though the night was still, she went back to bed, her mind racing,